After the sheer agony of counting down the worst adapted Fox X-Men heroes and villains, and seeing some of the absolute most mind-bogglingly infuriating and stupid adaptations of characters from comics into movies that I have ever witnessed, I needed to rest my poor brain for a bit. But now I've fully recovered, and it's finally time to do the inverse list by taking a look at the top most well-adapted Fox X-Men heroes. After doing those previous lists, many of you commented that a best adapted heroes list within Fox's shared X-Men universe was going to be straight up impossible. Were you right? Should this list be called the 15 least crappily adapted Fox X-Men heroes instead? Well, let's find out by activating my mutant power to direct the 3C system at every single hero making up this universe to rate how well or poorly they were adapted from their comic book source material into Fox's convoluted timeline of movies that make up their shared X-Men universe, and then rank them all, counting up to the absolute best there is at what they do. If what they do is be well adapted. But wait, I hear that one slow kid in the back asking, what the hell are these 3 C's? Well, those would be costume, character, and continuity. Costume rates a character's outfit or costume, which, spoiler in Fox's case, nearly everyone just straight up fails. Their overall look, and their superficial physical characteristics. Character rates their personality, their relationships with others, and their powers or abilities. And continuity rates their origin story, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. So, you've waited long enough. Let's start with the 15th best adapted Fox X-Men hero, with someone who immediately really does not deserve that title, Angel. Both versions are Warren Worthington III, the son of Warren Worthington II, who runs Worthington Industries, coming from an incredibly wealthy background. Both versions started developing wings upon hitting adolescence, and both versions attempted to hide this from their fathers. In the comics, this was by just wearing a harness to suppress them beneath his clothes. In the movies, this was by desperately trying to cut them off in a strange metaphor for boys in the bathroom at a certain age. In the comics, when his father learns of his mutation, he becomes somewhat distant towards him, wishing there was a cure to his mutation, though over time they did begin to reconnect before his father was eventually murdered. In the movies, when his father learns of his son's mutation, he dedicates all of his resources to helping to develop a cure, believing that by doing so he will be helping his son and all mutants. While Warren is initially willing to take the cure, he resists at the last second and flees his father gloriously with his wings. In the comics, he was recruited to join the X-Men, becoming one of the team's founding members and an incredibly important and popular part of X-Men lore, with decades of continuity and iconic moments to draw from for story material. All of which were completely disregarded for the movie, as he's just relegated to a side character in X-Men 3, and does not join the X-Men, despite the many lies in promo art where he's seen wearing a team uniform. However, towards the end of the movie, he saves his father, showing that though he didn't take part in the final battle, except in a deleted scene, he does have a heroic side to him. And at the end, we see him proudly flying over the city, showing that he's fully come to terms with his mutation. His upbringing, angelic looks, powers, and kinda working alongside the X-Men in a movie that also features the rest of the original team, even if they never share the screen together, is just enough to technically squeeze him onto this list. Even if it physically hurts me to say that, due to how pretty much everything that makes him such a popular and important character has been completely omitted from these movies. And to the couple of you saying, hey, what about Archangel in Apocalypse? Why wasn't that Angel? As far as that movie portrays him, he's seemingly an entirely different character. And if you want to see me go over him, he's down on one of the worst adapted lists. And being that we're starting the best adapted with friggin' Angel, you can imagine how bad those get. But now, moving up to 14 with a hero who's, a teeny bit better, Jubilee. Now, when it comes to other characters like the Juggernaut, despite whatever weird time anomalies there are, I can believe that the pre- and post-skip version are mostly the same character. But I cannot suspend my disbelief about that when it comes to friggin' Jubilee. One version was a teenager in the not-too-distant future of the original X-Men movies, which would be about the early 2000s, while the other is a teenager in the 80s, meaning they cannot be the same character. And you can't even use some kind of time travel mumbo-jumbo explanation that she was born earlier somehow due to the future being changed in Days of Futures Past. The timeline got changed in 1973, and X-Men Apocalypse takes place in 1983, where the 80s Jubilee first appears, clearly older than 10 years old, meaning that she was already born years before they arrived to change the future. And yeah, I could forget this, I could ignore this, except that the version they brought in to replace the original and break canon didn't do any more than the original anyways. In comics, Jubilation Lee wound up in an orphanage, but ran away and spent most of her time hanging out in malls, committing petty theft, and showing off her mutant ability to emit firework-like blasts from her hands to raise spare change to survive. She was soon after pursued by a mutant hunting group and saved by the X-Men. She secretly followed them back to their base and started hiding out there. Eventually, after an attack on the base by the Reavers, Jubilee watched helplessly as Wolverine is captured, brutalized, and tortured, and crucified. Jubilee sneaks out to help Wolverine and bring him back to her hiding spot in the base to recover. Wolverine becomes a sort of mentor to her afterwards, helping him out as a sidekick in his travels and forming an almost parental bond with her. Soon after having trained under improving herself alongside Wolverine, Jubilee becomes a member of the X-Men, despite her comparatively young age. In the movies, none of that matters for either version of the character, as we don't get to know much of anything about her. And the bond she shares with Wolverine in the comics was instead given to Rogue. Comic Jubilee is known for often wearing a yellow coat and big shades instead of the traditional X-Men uniform. In both movies, she dresses with a flair loosely inspired by her comic style, though a lot less cool and a lot less flamboyant. One of these was just a background cameo in the original movies, well, so you can give it a little forgiveness, but while the other was supposedly a lead character in X-Men Apocalypse. And yet, due to both of them doing virtually nothing in the actual story, neither of them showing their powers outside of deleted scenes, neither of them joining the X-Men or fighting anyone, and neither of them being much more than just a random student at the Xavier Institute, neither of them is really a better adaptation than the other. Though, the Apocalypse version is actually a teeny bit lower due to her random-ass placement in the timeline, being around the same age as the rest of the original team, decades before what the modern day of the time was, and nearly a decade before she was even introduced in comics, making this even more random. But due to her partially similar costume and her role as a teenager training under and alongside the X-Men, she's better than most heroes in this universe. Up to 13 we have Kitty Pryde. Both versions are young mutant girls who attend the Xavier Institute while growing to serve alongside the X-Men to protect others, and have the mutant ability to phase through solid matter. But while in the comics she's an incredibly important and popular character, in the movies she's relegated to just a background cameo just because she's got a cool power at first, before later being promoted to actual character. So far, a step up from what we've been doing so far. She's been played by multiple actresses across the movies, with none of them really looking like her younger, more gangly, curly-haired portrayal in the comics. However, the version that stuck around, appearing in both Last Stand and Days of Futures Past, looks very similar to her comic appearance at the time, with the more petite build as well as the straightened hair. However, like pretty much every X-Men hero, she lacks any of the color associated with her distinct comic costumes, instead going for the black full-body suits all the X-Men wear, with a little pink trim on it. While the comic version forms close bonds with most of the major X-Men, even starting a relationship with Colossus and befriending a small alien dragon named Lockheed. In the movies, we really don't see much between Colossus and Kitty despite being classmates, with her forming a close friendship and later temporary alternate timeline romance with Iceman instead. Though, after that timeline is changed, we do see a glimpse of her and Colossus teaching students together, so maybe. And though a version of Lockheed does appear, he has no connection to Kitty, instead being an imaginary friend of Magic's. Like the comics, Kitty does train with and eventually join alongside the X-Men, but we only see her training in the Danger Room and working alongside the team in one mission against the Brotherhood before the people in charge decided to abandon all of the characters we've been following and start doing prequels with totally different actors and characters instead. In both versions, we see an older version of Kitty in a horrific post-apocalyptic future lorded over by out-of-control self-replicating sentinels. Seeing no hope for this future in the comics, Rachel Summers uses her telepathic abilities to transfer Kitty's consciousness back in time to her body in the modern day to warn the X-Men to stop the assassination of Senator Robert Kelly that they believed was the crucial moment that led to this future coming to pass. In the movie version, we never had a Rachel Summers, and instead Kitty is somehow able to phase people's minds through time into the bodies of their previous selves, doing this to Wolverine instead of herself so he can try to stop the assassination of Bolivar Trask for the same reasons. Had they kept going with this main timeline, perhaps we could have learned a bit more about her, or she could have done a little more that could have pushed her up or dropped her down on this list, but they decided instead of following all the classic actors who made Days of Futures Past such a hit, they'd just keep following the prequel characters who were not as well received, and the whole franchise fell apart, sadly. So, let's keep moving up to number 12 with Iceman. Like Kitty, Iceman in the comics is a much more important hero than he is in the movies. In the movies, Bobby Drake is a student at the Xavier Institute decades after the X-Men first formed, who later begins training and joins the team officially to help fight against the Brotherhood. In the comics, Bobby Drake was among the first mutants recruited as a founding member of the X-Men soon after his mutant abilities manifested, and has fought alongside them for years as one of the most iconic and important members of the team. In the comics, Bobby was initially portrayed as the youthful, somewhat immature and lighthearted member of the team, while in the movies he is young and somewhat naive. He's portrayed as much more stoic and serious, showing maturity compared to Pyro, and acting as a sort of role model to other students such as Kitty. While the movies portray Bobby and Rogue as classmates and lovers, in the comics they met when they were both much older and do not share the movie version's bond, with the close relationship with Rogue despite being unable to touch her most famously being attributed to Gambit instead. Both versions have the ability to decrease temperature, and use this ability to create blasts of cold or ice, as well as freeze things, including their own bodies or the moisture in the air to create ice structures, such as the ones both versions use to slide around through the air. Initially in the comics, Iceman could only encase his body in snow, but later learned to create an ice armor, before later learning to turn himself into ice. While the movie version just learns to turn to ice while fighting Pyro in the third movie, and skips the other two versions before. Though I would have loved to see that snow version on screen. Let's hope. With the friendship to rivalry Pyro and him share as classmates in the movies not being something they share in the comics. Now, like Kitty, on a cursory glance, he may look pretty similar, but being that their personalities, relationships, costumes, origins, and major moments are all quite different, having ice or phasing powers and being on the X-Men is about all that's similar. And 4 characters in already who basically only share their powers means we're not off to a good start. Alright, now up to 11 on what you may have forgotten is supposed to be a Best Adapted X-Men Heroes list with the Stepford Cuckoos. In the comics, the Stepford Cuckoos are a group of 5 telepathic girls who attend the Xavier School and are protégés of Emma Frost. They all look, dress, and act in unison most of the time, which leads to them being known as the 5 in 1. Though one of them tragically dies, helping to stop a riot at Xavier's caused by Quentin Quire and his gang. And another later joins up with Magneto soon after dying, dropping their number down to 3. In X-Men 3, we see a group of 3 identical girls walking down a hall at the Institute in the background. They're all blonde, dressed identical, and walking in near perfect unison. Though we learn nothing about them whatsoever, never hear them talk, and never get a close-up, they are dressed similar to outfits they've worn in the comics. They're clearly students at the school, and they're all holding school books, studiously implying that they're likely top students as they are in the comics. Emma Frost is sadly dead at this point in continuity, so that connection is not possible. Though we do see another quick and much crappier than this cameo of Quentin Quire at the end of Dark Phoenix, letting us know it's possible, but very unlikely, that one of them died in similar circumstances to the comics. Since we learn nothing about their powers, personalities, or literally just anything at all about them, they don't get to go any higher. Though since we also don't see any contradictions to this explicitly stated, they don't go any lower as well. Now, there are always a few of you in the comments who absolutely hate when I count what are basically cameos as characters in these rankings, but I entirely disagree for 2 reasons. One, if they're on screen, then they canonly exist in this universe. For me to neglect them on a ranking would be like me saying that I'm not going to cover Kitty because she didn't do enough to warrant being covered. And the second reason is that if you're not familiar with the characters cameoing, you may not care how similar or different they are from the comics. But if you are, then you absolutely do, especially if they're a character you love. So taking a moment to see if the writers gave a crap about them or just tossed them in for a quick look or power is always something worthy to do, in my opinion. And though so far none of these characters are all that much like the comics, we're now entering the top 10 most well-adapted Fox X-Men heroes, starting with Colossus. Colossus is a very confusing one, because we have 2 completely different versions in the movies that are kind of the same character and kind of not. In the comics, Pyotr Rasputin was originally from a farm in Russia, but was recruited on a mission to use his mutant powers to help save the original team of X-Men after a mission gone awry. After which he stayed in America, becoming a mainstay on the team, remaining another incredibly popular and important member of the team for decades. He has the power to transform his body tissue into an incredibly durable organic metal that greatly increases his physical strength and durability. And though he fights using his immense strength, at heart he is a kind and sensitive soul, who would prefer a simple, peaceful life, something he expresses through his enjoyment of painting and art. He forms close bonds and longtime friendships with the rest of the team, and eventually meets Kitty, and after getting to know each other, they begin dating. Though, like the rest of his life, their relationship has been somewhat tumultuous. He has faced many personal losses and difficulties, one of the greatest of which was the kidnapping and corruption of his beloved sister Ilyana Rasputin at the hands of the demonic being known as Belasco, though she was eventually found and saved, becoming the hero known as Magic. In the movies, Colossus is originally seen as a student at the Xavier Institute, who later trains to become an X-Men, helping to fight the Brotherhood. He says and does virtually nothing besides fighting. However, there are a few minor details we learn about him that gets him a teeny bit higher than his movie classmates Kitty and Bobby. While a student, we see him sketching, showing that he shares an interest in art and has a softer side. While Bobby and Kitty are shown to be somewhat helpless students scared by Stryker's men attacking the mansion, Colossus immediately armors up and starts fighting them back, soon after leading many students to help escape the mansion to safety. So despite having such a small role, we see his heroic side and his selfless nature is similar from the start. And both in the Danger Room and later in battle, he does a version of the iconic fastball special move from comics, where he hurls Wolverine forwards in battle. However, due to Wolverine in the movies being way taller than he is in the comics, instead of just tossing him forwards, he spins him around to gain momentum, kind of getting rid of the fastball part of that name. Though he initially shows no real connection to Kitty, later in the timeline we see that he is teaching a class with her, implying they may be in a relationship, though this is never officially confirmed. And while Bobby and Kitty are never used again after Days of Futures Past, Colossus actually does come back. as basically the only X-Men we see in the modern day in the Deadpool movies, meaning that eventually in the timeline he graduated to the role of mainline X-Men, and we see him arriving to help both mutants and humans in dangerous situations, talking with the philosophy of a superhero, believing that killing is wrong and prioritizing saving civilians at all costs. The original version didn't have an accent, while the Deadpool version has a thick Russian one. Most people would chalk this up to Deadpool not giving a crap about continuity, but my completely baseless and speculative personal fan theory that I just made up for this video right this second is that in the original timeline, due to Bolivar Trask being killed, a greater distrust in mutants spread across the globe, leading to Colossus's parents sending him to the Xavier Institute for safety at a very young age, virtually eliminating his natural accent due to growing up in the US. Well, after changing the timeline and preventing his assassination, mutant kind was a teeny bit less distrusted, leading to him growing up on the farm in Russia as normal until years later being recruited into the X-Men by Xavier. There's absolutely no basis for this, but it's my attempt to explain this meaningless little difference that nobody gives a crap about. In the comics, Colossus is very tall, with his height often being portrayed as increasing while using his powers. While in the original movie, he's just portrayed as tall. In Deadpool, he is shown to be much closer to his over-the-top build of the comics. And while Ilyana Rasputin does exist within the Fox continuity, we have no evidence besides the last names and being Russian that they are siblings, with her origin being very different. However, we also have no evidence that they aren't siblings, and if Disney does one thing with all this X-Men crap they've got planned, that would make me happy. It would be reuniting these two in at least one scene. Do that, and no matter how much Doomsday and Secret Wars sucks ass, I will give it a 10 out of 10. Next up to 9, we come to Storm. Unlike everyone so far in this list, Storm is an important member of the X-Men in both the movies and comics. Both versions share similar looks, including the white hair, though the comic version has light-colored eyes while the movie version does not. Both versions have the ability to control the weather, making her one of the most powerful mutants in both continuities, which she uses to direct lightning at enemies, create powerful whirlwinds, manipulate winds to give her virtual flight, and many other creative abilities, with both versions' eyes usually turning pitch white when using her powers. Storm has had many costumes in comics, many of which have been black, technically making the black outfits in the movies a teeny bit more accurate on her, even if completely inadvertently. But while most of the other X-Men lack any of the major affectations of their costumes, Storm actually wears her cape, adding to her looking a bit more like a proper superhero instead of a Matrix cosplayer like everyone else. In the comics, Aurora Monroe's parents were killed when she was very young, leaving her trapped and helpless beneath rubble for an extended period of time, giving her lifelong issues with claustrophobia and leading to her living as an orphan trying to survive on the streets of Cairo. In the movies, we never learn the details of her origin or show any signs of claustrophobia, but we see that she was living as an orphan in Cairo as well. Both versions went on to survive as pickpockets. In the comics, she eventually stole from a traveling Charles Xavier, who would years later recruit her onto the X-Men. In the post-Days of Futures Past revised timeline in the movies, we see a young Storm get into trouble after a robbery gone wrong, with a newly awakened Apocalypse saving and recruiting her. We don't know how much of this was the same in the previous timeline and how much was changed. It's implied in the movie that Apocalypse only rose due to the time changes, meaning she'd never have met him initially and just been later recruited by Xavier. However, the movies also show that apparently her white hair was due to Apocalypse enhancing her powers, which is friggin' stupid and completely contradicts the young white-haired girl we saw through Cerebro in First Class that was clearly supposed to be Storm at the time. I mean, sure, her age wouldn't add up with this girl's age decades later, but no one ages in the prequel timeline anyway, so who friggin' cares? So, we don't know the story of how she originally joined the movie's X-Men, but in the revised timeline, she was recruited as a Horseman of Apocalypse, but upon seeing that the guy who is openly trying to conquer the world is actually a jerk, she rebels against him and helps the X-Men defeat him, joining the team soon after. In the comics, she was simply recruited into the X-Men by Xavier and was not initially a villain or famously been portrayed as working with Apocalypse, so all of this was a weird choice. Anyways, in the comics, she wandered further into Africa, where she started manifesting her powers and used them to help some of the people in areas struggling with droughts, causing her to be nearly worshipped as a goddess by some. While we never see any of this in the movies, in the deleted scene in X-Men Origins Wolverine, we do see a young white-haired girl who can seemingly control the weather living in a small African village. However, deleted scenes aren't usually canon, and thank God for that, or I'd have to take all those scenes of Colossus and the X-Men brutally murdering mutants in The Last Stand as canon too. Storm in the movies completely lacks her over-the-top way of speaking when using her powers, and is overall a lot less talkative and more reserved than the more outspoken and assertive version in the comics. Though she does take more of a leadership role in the third movie, when most of the team has been killed off, as she has in the comics many times. So, despite many things being different, I think we finally moved up from, it's okay of an adaptation, I guess, to the much more prestigious, it's an alright adaptation section of this adaptational accuracy ranking. Boy howdy, how exciting. At 8, we've got Jean Grey. In the comics, Jean is the daughter of John and Elaine Grey, who started manifesting immense psychic abilities as her mutation when her powers started to appear at a young age. In the comics, Jean's abilities first manifested after witnessing her friend being hit by a car, with her psychic abilities connecting her and her friend's minds as she dies, causing Jean immense trauma at a young age and causing her to become withdrawn and virtually catatonic. After meeting with Charles Xavier, he helped her erect psychic walls within her mind to help limit her abilities until she became older and trained enough to control her abilities on her own, as well as to help deal with the trauma she'd experienced. In the movies, we have two different origins due to the timeline changes in Days of Futures Past. In the first, we don't see when Jean's powers manifest, but we see she lives with her parents and already has a great deal of control over her telepathic and telekinetic abilities, with Xavier and Magneto both reaching out to her, offering to help her train those abilities as they grow stronger, though she doesn't seem to be affected by any specific trauma. Due to much of her mutation being rooted in her unconscious, which Xavier deems as making it incredibly dangerous, he also helps her erect psychic walls to limit those abilities at a young age. In the revised timeline, her powers manifested while her parents were driving. Upon hearing many voices in her head at once, Jean screams for them to be quiet, which inadvertently causes her mother to fall unconscious at the wheel, with the car crashing and killing her mother soon after. Her father, wanting nothing to do with her, dumps her on Xavier and leaves, with Xavier both blocking the greater extent of her abilities as well as suppressing the trauma of her mother's death, and for some friggin' reason, completely blocking the memory that her father is even alive as well. All versions soon after move to the Xavier Institute and begin training to use their abilities to help others from both mutant, human, and even alien threats as a member of the X-Men. In the comics, she was one of the founding members. In the movies, there was a short-lived first-class team decades before. In the comics, she initially goes by the name Marvel Girl, while in the movies, she never is given a code name. All three versions soon after meet a young Scott Summers, forming a long-time relationship with him, and become close friends with other members of the team like Storm. In the comics and original timeline, Jean Grey meets Wolverine when he was recruited onto the team years later. While Jean is with Scott, Wolverine develops feelings for her, and though she stays with Scott, she feels drawn to Wolverine as well, creating friction in their relationship. All three versions become more and more powerful as time goes on, and more of her abilities break through her psychic walls, and the suppressed trauma within her subconscious begins to return. In the comics, while on a mission in space, Jean is forced to endure the radiation of a solar flare, using her powers to try to block it while sacrificing herself to save the rest of the X-Men. In the original comic version, the massive effects of the flare caused her powers to reach their full potential, seemingly dying and being reborn as a more powerful version of herself she dubs the Phoenix. It's later revealed that while succumbing to the effects of the radiation, Jean psychically cried out and her mind was touched by an incredibly powerful, psionic, primal cosmic entity known as the Phoenix Force that bonded itself to her to help her survive, leading to her apparent revival and newfound, stronger abilities. However, it is also later revealed that this being who resurfaced from the waters their shuttle had crashed into was actually a copy of Jean created by the Phoenix Force to save her friends, while Jean was placed in a regenerative psychic cocoon to slowly heal from her terminal injuries, with this Phoenix Force-empowered copy believing itself to be the real Jean Grey for a time. This all creating one of the most beautiful, overly convoluted messes of retcons in comic history that somehow all works out for the better in the end despite being a bunch of total nonsense. Due to the different timelines between the movies, we get to see both the Jean Ascended versions of the Phoenix as well as the Phoenix Force-empowered ones, neither of which are done particularly well. In the original timeline, Jean seemingly sacrifices her life to save the X-Men from the force of a massive amount of water rushing towards them from a broken dam. Much later, she rises from those waters, reborn as the Phoenix due to having access to a higher level of her suppressed powers. In the revised timeline, while on a mission in space, the team encounters a powerful energy that has damaged a space shuttle that is soon revealed to be the Phoenix Force. She sacrifices herself to absorb the Force into herself, and though seemingly dying, she is revealed to have survived, with her power growing to even greater levels. And soon after becoming the Phoenix, all three versions are corrupted and driven mad. All of which was what we can go into what will sadly be included on the Best Adapted Villains list, spoiler. But after doing all kinds of chaotic, damaging stuff, all three versions of Jean then go on to heroically sacrifice themselves to save others, knowing that the raging power within them is too much to control, with all three then also eventually returning to life again later on. In the comics, with it being revealed the real Jean was healing in a psychic cocoon beneath the water she seemingly died and risen from, and the original and revised timeline versions of the movies being shown to have returned to life after changes in Days of Futures Past rewrite the future in ways that we never got to learn. So though all the details are completely different, the basic arc of the character, her relationships, and elements of her personality are a lot closer all around than those we've seen so far. Like everyone else, Jean doesn't wear any of her costumes from the comics, though Jean's comic sense of style is certainly unique, so I don't know how well those would have been adapted, even if they'd be awesome to see. But they even ditched doing any kind of version of the Phoenix outfit as well, which is a shame because it's one of the greatest costumes in all of comic history, and I don't know why you just replace it with a jacket. Anyways, at 7 we have Dazzler. In the comics, Alison Blair is a mutant who dreams of becoming a singer and making it big in the music industry. She develops the mutant ability to transform sound into light, and though initially keeping her ability hidden, she later incorporated it into her stage show, transforming the sounds of her concerts into a dazzling light show for the audience, while initially not revealing the light's mutant origins so as not to hurt her musical career. Unlike many mutants, she initially has no desire to pursue superheroics, instead wanting to focus on her musical career, straight up turning down the X-Men's offer to join the team upon meeting them. Though, when encountering danger to innocents and villains, she would often feel compelled to sacrifice her own dreams to use her powers to help out and become more and more embroiled in the insane world of mutants and superheroics, teaming up with heroes like the X-Men and Spider-Man and fighting against incredibly dangerous foes like Enchantress, Doctor Doom, and even Galactus. Years later, she reveals her mutant identity to the public, which causes her career to fall apart. She later joins the X-Men and other teams, eventually building her career back up, becoming a popular singer in the mutant community, with her level of fame with the rest of humanity rising or falling depending on the public's current mood on mutants. In the movies, she appears for a very quick scene as a cameo in Dark Phoenix, singing at a party in the woods near the Xavier Institute after the X-Men have successfully completed a rescue mission in space. While no one in these movies ever wears their costumes, Dazzler is decked out in her full-on classic 80s outfit, including the bell-bottoms, collar, bracelets, disco ball necklace, and the shape of the blue face paint masking her eyes. Basically, only missing the roller skates she zips around on during performances and while fighting villains, which, due to being on grass in the woods, I can't even blame her for. This 2-second scene is randomly one of the most accurately adapted costumes in the entirety of superhero movies. We don't know her connection to any of the X-Men or the Xavier Institute, whether she's associated with them or just singing here. We don't know if she's pursuing a musical career outside of woods parties or if the world knows of her status as a mutant. We don't know anything about her, and she's only in the movie for a few moments, which stops us from learning enough about her to move her any higher in this list. But we see that while singing, she uses her power to transform sound into light to put on a show, as she does in the comics as well. Now, while you could get away with this kind of outfit in the 80s when Dazzler was created, this movie is based in the 90s, so I have no idea why she's dressed like that. And that instead of singing in the style of the 80s or even the 90s, she's pretty much singing a song that sounds like it would have come from the present day of the time the movie was made. So, it's pretty cool to see a cameo character actually done so well and randomly respectfully. Unfortunately, though, this cameo was in Dark Phoenix, so there's a good chance you never even saw it. Now moving up to 6, we've got Wolverine. Both versions were born as James Howlett in Canada. Both versions are somewhat sickly in childhood and were friends with the family groundskeeper's son. In the comics, this was a boy nicknamed Dog. In the movies, this was Victor Creed. In the comics, Dog and James form a rift between them due to Dog's increasingly volatile nature, leading to the groundskeeper, Thomas Logan, being fired, to which he angrily returns to the Howlett home and kills James's father. The stress causes James' mutation to manifest, and he attacks the man with newly formed bone claws, killing him, soon after having it revealed that the man was actually his real father. In the movies, the groundskeeper drunkenly enters the household looking for his mother, eventually killing James's father, with James gaining his mutation, killing the man, and learning of his true parentage as well. Immediately after, both versions of James fled the family estate. In the comics, he and his half-brother Dog separated, meeting up again much later. In the movies, he and his half-brother Victor stayed side by side, surviving together and deepening their brotherly bond for decades, due to both of them gaining similar mutant healing abilities that kept them unnaturally young. And, trying to keep a low profile and not be found, both versions take on the last name of their real father as their own, Logan. In the comics, after a series of further tragedies, Wolverine retreats from human society for a time, embracing his feral nature and learning to live and hunt like an animal in the woods, his only real companions being wolves. Though he was much later brought forcefully back to the world of humanity by a cruel, violent man named Saul Creed, who Logan eventually killed, earning the eternal animosity of Saul's even crueler and more violent older brother, Victor. Both versions of Wolverine traveled and eventually found their way into becoming a soldier across many wars. In the comics, on his own. In the movies, always alongside his brother. The comic version was born decades later, so did not fight in the Civil War as the movie version did. Both versions are eventually recruited into the Weapon X program due to his combat abilities and powers, doing Black Ops missions and working alongside Sabretooth in both versions, with Wolverine in both eventually quitting the team, both being specifically disgusted by the violent actions of Sabretooth. In the movies, he meets Silver Fox, falls in love, and starts living a simple life after quitting. When he refuses to rejoin Team X, Sabretooth murders her, though it later reveals that she faked her death in an overly convoluted plan to manipulate Wolverine and save her captured sister. In the comics, he had met and fallen in love with her before joining Weapon X, though she was still seemingly killed off by Sabretooth before reappearing alive as a member of Weapon X later on. Both versions of Wolverine tracked Sabretooth down to a bar and attacked him in revenge, only increasing their animosity for each other. In the movies, he is manipulated into rejoining Weapon X and agrees to undergo a procedure to have adamantium grafted to his bones so he can hunt down and kill Sabretooth, though after being betrayed, he escaped the facility. In the comics, he is captured and experimented on, with adamantium forcefully bonded to his bones and subjected to intense mental conditioning and brainwashing in an attempt to control him. He broke out and slaughtered nearly everyone in the facility in a berserker frenzy and wandered into the wilderness for months. In the revised timeline, he is similarly captured, experimented on, and brainwashed into a savage beast, though with that timeline's versions of Jean Grey and the other X-Men breaking him out while trying to rescue their allies. What differences there are to him and his relationships with others between then and the next time we see him is completely unknown. Both versions lose most of their memories soon after. In the comics, this is due to years of brainwashing experiments, false memory implantations, and suppressed trauma. In the movies, this is because he is shot through the brain by an adamantium bullet. Both versions wander Canada for years. In the comics, he is eventually found and brought into Department H, an agency in the Canadian government centered around superhumans that brought together the team Alpha Flight, becoming an agent for them known as Wolverine, and eventually facing the Hulk, which is where we first meet him in comics. No Hulk in the Fox continuity, so the first time we see him, he's an aimless wanderer who gets into cage fights for money. He meets Rogue, who sneaks into his truck when he's leaving after realizing he's also a mutant, and they're both attacked by members of Magneto's Brotherhood, including Sabretooth, who Wolverine has no memory of. Both versions are then soon after recruited into the X-Men. In the comics, this is due to his incredible fighting skills and his work with Department H and Alpha Flight. He is recruited into an all-new, all-different version of the team on a mission to rescue the original group, and soon after found a long-term home on the X-Men, developing bonds and relationships with many of its members, such as developing feelings for Jean Grey and coming to deeply respect Professor Xavier's ideals despite his violent and pessimistic nature. In the movies, he and Rogue are rescued by the X-Men and brought back to the Xavier Institute. He initially only stays to take Professor X up on his offer to help him recover his forgotten memories, though over time develops close bonds with other members of the team, such as a paternal bond with Rogue mirroring his relationship with Jubilee in the comics, as well as feelings for Jean and a deep respect for the Professor as well. Both versions go on to become major members of the team, fighting against threats like Magneto, Sentinels, Magneto, Silver Samurai, Magneto, Dark Phoenix, Lady Deathstrike, and also Magneto, the latter of which he finds himself quite vulnerable to due to his ability to control metal. And while the X-Men try to deal with things non-lethally, both versions of Wolverine have their own code and are far more likely to kill when he deems it necessary. Though he shares the claws, gruff shaggy look, extreme musculature, and bizarre specific hairstyle of the comics, there are many differences, as the comic version is said to be about 5'3", though this will vary from artist to artist, while the movie version is about a foot taller than that. And while the comic version is well known for his variety of bright yellow costumes, the movie version is usually only ever wearing a white tank top or the same full-body black suits as the rest of the X-Men. Both versions have a deep connection to Japan and fall in love with a woman named Mariko, becomes allies with a woman named Yukio, and fought the Silver Samurai there. Though the versions of all these characters and the situations surrounding these events are almost completely different in almost every single way. In a post-apocalyptic future where Sentinels have taken over the world, he is part of a resistance formed to help combat them. Though, while in the movies it was his conscience that was sent back in time to try to change the past, in the comics it was Kitty Pryde's. And though Disney has since declared that Logan is canon with the rest of the X-Men films since gaining the rights to those movies, in the original Fox timelines it was considered and stated as an alternate timeline and more of a spiritual ending to the character than a literal one. So, since nothing past Fox is relevant for this ranking, I'm going to piss off a good number of you Logan fans out there by moving on. Since, as an adaptation of the comic version, the old man Logan scene in that movie doesn't rate high enough to make it on this list as his own character. And also due to Wolverine being the main character of these movies, having the most screen time, and having entire movies going over his history, this section has been long enough already. So we now enter the top 5 most well-adapted Fox X-Men heroes, starting with Nightcrawler. Kurt Ragnar was a German mutant with a distinct blue skin, technically like fur in the comics, though artists never portray it that way. A pointed tail and ears, long claw-like fingers that increase his agility, and fangs that give him a demonic appearance. His mutant power is to teleport himself, as well as an amount of matter such as his clothes or other people he's touching. He doesn't need to, but it is preferable that he can see where he's teleporting or know the layout of the area he's teleporting to, as his body does not display any walls, floors, or objects, so he may inadvertently teleport inside of them if not careful. In the comics, Nightcrawler is revealed to be the son of Mystique, and at the time of his appearance in First Class, Azazel. And though this is never explicitly stated in the movie, there is evidence that this may be true as well, such as their similar appearances and when Mystique becomes extra distraught when looking at photos of Azazel dead. Both versions had difficult childhoods, with both versions growing up as orphans who were persecuted for his demonic look, going on to find a home in the circus where people dazzled at his miraculous acrobatic abilities without knowing he was a mutant before being forced to leave. We see in the prequel movies that at one point he had been captured and forced to fight in mutant cage matches. In the revised timeline, he is rescued by Mystique and brought to the Xavier Institute. While in the original timeline, Mystique was not as heroic, so this likely never happened, as it's clear they'd never met before in X-Men 2. And at some point, he is instead eventually captured by William Stryker and through a brainwashing technique forced to unknowingly attack the President of the United States to further Stryker's plans against mutants. The X-Men track him down and learn of his innocence, taking him with them as they try to stop Stryker, where his kind nature and powers prove invaluable in saving all mutants and humans from both Stryker and Magneto's plans. Though, afterwards, he seemingly goes his own way instead of joining the team or staying at the Xavier Institute. In the comics and revised timeline, both versions are recruited into and join a later incarnation of the X-Men. In the comics, the all-new, all-different X-Men, who are recruited to save the original team. In the movies, the second incarnation of the team that has a lineup consisting of members from the original team and the all-new, all-different team. Despite his demonic appearance, all versions are devout Catholics, whose faith and kind, caring attitude positively affect the rest of the team, as we see with Storm in the movies or Wolverine in the comics. Like the rest of the movie X-Men, he never wears his most iconic red and black costume. Instead, they give him a Thriller jacket, so... Though at the end of Apocalypse, he did have a fairly good comic-accurate-ish costume that they just decided to just toss in the garbage and not use again for some reason. No idea why. In comics, Nightcrawler is known for adding a swashbuckling sword-fighting style to his teleportation abilities, and though we see him use a knife, this is something he never really does. One of the major differences are the scars we see on his face in both timelines, which he refers to as self-inflicted to represent his sins, adding to his deeply religious characterization, something he doesn't have on him in the comics. Sadly, in all of his appearance, he doesn't actually do all that much, but due to his look, stance, role on the X-Men in the prequels, his powers, likely origin, elements of his beliefs, motivations, and personalities, until the tail end of Dark Phoenix, that is. Overall, we have a character who is a lot closer to the comics than all of those below, if we take both timelines into account, despite some pretty big differences and his much lower level of importance to the franchise. But moving up to 4, we've got Cyclops. Now, if any character got effed over in the movies, it was Cyclops. In the comics, he's basically the main character of the X-Men franchise, and has been since the first issue. But in the movies, he's like the 5th main character. Both versions are Scott Summers, a mutant with the ability to shoot powerful energy beams from his eyes whenever they're open. To control this, he wears special ruby quartz glasses that can block the blast while allowing him to look at his surroundings without damaging them. He also wears a special visor that allows him to control how much force the optic beam projects out, as well as to control the range and shape of it. In the comics, Scott Summers and his younger brother Alex were involved in a plane crash that seemingly killed their parents. They wound up as orphans, and Alex was adopted, while Scott spent most of his youth in an orphanage he eventually runs away from. In the movies, Alex is randomly Scott's older brother, and they seem to have been raised together. We see their parents, but whether they're biological parents or not, we never learn. In the movies, his brother Alex was recruited years earlier and became a founding member of the X-Men, while in the comics, Scott was recruited after running away from the orphanage and being chased by a crowd before seemingly causing damage from his optic blasts. He is found and recruited into the X-Men as its very first member, then helps to track down and recruit the rest of the original team. In the movies, he's recruited 2 decades after his brother, who for some reason does not appear to age in that time. His power activates while he is in school, and his brother leads him to the Xavier Institute to learn how to control and use them. Both versions train and become members of the X-Men, meeting other mutants like Jean Grey, who he falls in love with. Both versions are natural leaders, with the comic Scott being placed in charge of the team at a young age, and leading this and other versions of the X-Men through the years. In the movies, in the original timeline, we see he is Professor X's right hand, leading the team in the field and promising to continue to do so if anything happened to the Professor. In the revised timeline, we see that in the past, though he was initially reluctant after his brother is killed, he mans up and tries to be a hero like he was, naturally following into a leadership role amongst the rest of the team. In the comics, Scott learns of his brother being alive years after joining, and so is not inspired by him to be a hero, but more so by the Professor's ideals of a better future for humans and mutants. Both versions become close friends and trusted allies with Storm and other mutants, and eventually meets Wolverine, who he forms an immediate rivalry with. And while in the comics he gains a respect and close camaraderie with Wolverine over time, in the movies they never really got time to do this as they don't actually share that much screen time together. Both versions are intensely in love with Jean, suffering greatly when she dies. Though in the comics, Cyclops is a lot more stoic, having suffered more tragedies in his life than most are ever forced to endure, and continuing to do what he can to fight villains and protect people while leading the X-Men to the best of his abilities after her death. While in the movies, Jean's death breaks Scott, pushing him into a spiraling depression that causes Wolverine to need to take a more active role in the team, and in the school. And much, much later, when he and Jean start to drift apart, Scott begins a relationship with Emma Frost. And while we see a younger version of him with an Emma who can turn into Diamond in Wolverine Origins, the movies later decided to make an entirely new version of Emma Frost who dies before Scott ever meets her and would have been like 20 years older than him anyways. Another connection to the comics that is kind of there in the movies but never developed is Cable, who in the comics is Cyclops' son from the future. And though he's named Nathan Summers in the movies, implying this is the case, this is never officially confirmed. Both versions are very disciplined, serious, responsible, and authoritative personalities later in life, usually focused on the mission and not one to crack jokes or act playfully often. While none of the team wears their comic costumes, Cyclops' outfit is at least a bit closer to outfits he's worn in the comics, as he has just worn a full-body jumpsuit with goggles. Though for a half second at the end of Apocalypse, we did get a pretty close comic costume, but then they just tossed that away in the next movie. Do I award full points for a half-second tease that they just throw away for no reason? No. One of the major differences between the two is the comic version is an incredibly skilled and competent fighter and athlete, able to hold his own against even mutants who far outclass him physically. While in the movies, for the most part, he's just a guy who shoots lasers. His overall character, initial role in the team, looks, some of his relationships and powers make him a better overall adaptation than most characters in this franchise, and had we gotten to see much of him in any of those movies, he'd probably be able to get a bit higher, but most of the screen time he'd normally get is stolen by Wolverine, Jean Grey, Havoc, and friggin' Mystique of all characters, so more reasons it just sucks to be a Cyclops fan. But here we are, now entering the top 3 most well-adapted Fox X-Men characters, starting with Beast. Beast is Henry McCoy, a mutant who showed himself to be incredibly brilliant from a young age, despite his ironically brutish mutant appearance at first. In the comics, his mutation gives him a somewhat bestial, ape-like appearance, with large extended limbs that greatly increase his strength and agility, as well as coordination and balance to animal-like levels. In the movies, they ditch pretty much all of that, except giving him prehensile simian-like feet that he can use like hands and hang from. Otherwise, he just looks like a regular dude. In the comics, he is recruited as a founding member of the X-Men while in high school due to his immense intellect and powerful mutation, training and learning at the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. In the movies, Hank graduated from Harvard at a young age and is hired to work in a research branch of the CIA, and built the early prototypes for what would become both the Blackbird and Cerebro, which have different origins in the comics, and later on joins and becomes a founding member of the X-Men. Their earlier personalities are completely different. In the comics, Hank does have issues with his appearance, and how it causes people to treat and underestimate him despite his immense intellect, but he keeps up the front of an incredibly jovial and playful attitude most of the time. In the movies, he's much shyer and more awkward, and his mutation causes him immense shame, completely hiding it from others and dedicating his life from a young age to finding a way to eliminate it. So ashamed of his mutation that he sees himself as a freak despite Mystique, not caring at all, thinking it's cool, and wanting to jump his bones from the second she meets him. Both versions further mutate themselves with serums they develop. In the movies, this is a failed attempt to cure his mutation that actually causes it to advance to higher levels. In the comics, this is after developing a serum that can activate latent mutant genes that he took to purposefully further mutate himself in order to try to temporarily conceal his appearance. But he waits too long to take the antidote and the changes become permanent. In both versions, he grows fur, which in the comics was initially gray, but later turned blue, as it does in the movies, and increases his bestial appearance and abilities, giving both versions sharper teeth and claws, greatly increasing their strength, dexterity, and agility, as well as enhancing their senses. While the movies, this first takes the form of a somewhat feline appearance that later turns more ape-like, in the comics it's the opposite, with his more feline appearance coming much later. In the comics, there have been times Beast has temporarily returned to his more human-looking form, while in the movies he develops a serum that completely negates mutation that he takes to keep the budget lower and allow him to appear fully human when he desires at the loss of his abilities. Though not originally intended, this is likely why he appears human in his first appearance in a cameo in X-Men 2. While the movies portray Beast as being incredibly close to Mystique, in the comics they really aren't. Though he is close with the Professor and with other members of the X-Men, having known them for a very long time and fought side by side in many battles. One of the major differences is that in the comics, Beast prefers to talk in a more sophisticated, proper manner, showing off his knowledge of large, multisyllable words and quoting some of the great works of literature and theater. And though he's portrayed in this way in his original appearance in the original movies and the prequels, for some reason they ditched this, and just have him talk like a normal guy, without the poetic and show-offy manner he's usually portrayed with. Chronologically, when he returns to the team much later on, he does talk a lot closer to how he's usually portrayed in comics, speaking in an obviously educated, higher-class manner, quoting Shakespeare and even saying his comic catchphrase of, "Oh my stars and garters." While Beast always returns to the team, of all the original members, he's the most likely to also pursue other avenues. In the comics, working with various corporations as well as the government and even the Avengers for large periods of time. In the movies, after serving with the team for years, we see him in a quick cameo being interviewed on TV about mutants, and years later we see him openly serving in the United States Cabinet as the Secretary of Mutant Affairs. And like the comics, he had mixed feelings about the mutant cure. Beast has worn a few costumes, but is best known for wearing only shorts or pants, showing off his blue fur. And though in the prequels he wears the same costumes as everyone else, with similar colors to his original costume, but with completely different cut, in the original movies, due to his old costume not fitting anymore, he wears it open, showing off his fur. However, while Cyclops, Jean, and the other X-Men of the original movies were adapted into their dark jumpsuits in a time when they'd nearly always worn colorful costumes in the comics, Beast was adapted in years later, after the X-Men in the comics had been portrayed with dark outfits and jackets inspired by those movie versions, meaning that technically his outfit is a teeny bit more accurate in that regards as well, though still not looking much like that version even did in the comics, as he was more prone to wearing his outfits in a more sophisticated manner than the rest of the punks at that time. Had the version from X-Men 3 been the only Beast in this franchise, he'd definitely have appeared higher, since his look, personality, mannerisms, and fighting style are all so close to the comics. But all these random changes to his characterization and look in the prequel keeps him a bit lower, while also giving him points for his levels of scientific intelligence as well as status as the only founding member in the comics who was also one in the movies. However, while he was a teenager in the comics when he first joined and was around the same age as Cyclops and the others, in the movies he's around his 20s back in the 60s, meaning that while Cyclops was a teenager, he was already in his 40s, and by the time of his first appearance in the original movies, he would be around his 60s. But now here we are, at the second most well-adapted Fox X-Men hero with Captain Deadpool. Just Deadpool. If you already watched my best adapted MCU heroes list, you likely saw him coming, since he scored really high on that one due to keeping the continuity he'd built up in the Fox movies. And since the competition as an adaptation here is even worse than it is in the MCU, it only makes sense he'd get higher. Deadpool's had multiple origins across different comics, some very contradictory, but the basic version is that he had military training before eventually becoming a mercenary, as we learned the movie version had as well. Both versions are Wade Wilson, who met and fell in love with Vanessa Carlyle, though the comic and movie versions are very different. He was then tragically diagnosed with an extreme and inoperable form of terminal cancer and leaves Vanessa to spare her from watching him slowly die. In the comics, Wilson found hope in the Weapon X program and was experimented on to implant Wolverine's healing factor into another. In the movie, he is recruited into a mysterious experiment that subjects him to tortures to trigger any latent mutant genes within him, with no specific connection to Wolverine despite the movie version's obsession with him. In both versions, while being experimented on, he is tormented by a man known as Ajax, and upon learning it, continually mocked his real name, Francis, which pisses Ajax off. His healing factor heals him faster than the cancer can kill him, but he becomes hideously disfigured in the process and starts wearing a full-body suit and mask to hide his deformity. And both versions took their name from a Deadpool he and others were placed in, with bets on who would die first, though in completely different situations. Both versions continue on as mercenaries and skirt the line between hero, anti-hero, and anti-villain, depending on his current motivations, though the movie version does try to be a bit more heroic on average than the comic version originally did. In the early comics, Deadpool was a more serious villain, but later developed into the semi-heroic and likely insane personality traits he's become known for. And though Wolverine Origins portrayed him as quite villainous even before that awful transformation, in the modern version, he's been pretty much portrayed as the heroic/crazy version from the start. Now, whether the Wolverine Origins version of Deadpool is the same character, just different due to timeline changes, or whether any of what we learn about him is relevant to this version of the character, is a question the movie completely ignores and sidesteps and would likely make fun of me for thinking too much about. But since I already went over that version on the worst adapted list, and evidence seems to suggest he's not the same character anyways, I'll go with the spirit of the Deadpool movies and just not think about it too much. Their costumes are some of the closest adaptations we've ever had, including being one of the few heroes to try and adapt the white eye look so many characters in comics have that they rarely attempt in live action. Both versions use a variety of weapons, including his iconic katanas, but the movie version never used the teleportation device he's worn in the comics. Both versions have a close ally named Weasel, both versions had a roommate named Blind Owl, both versions also meet and initially fight against, but form a sort of messed up friendship with the time traveler Cable, who most importantly, however, both versions have a friend who serves as a henchman for an evil organization named Bob. In the comics, he's a member of Hydra, while in the movies, he's serving as one of Ajax's men. However, unlike the movies, he did not have any specific relationship with Colossus or Negasonic Teenage Warhead at the time the movies were made. And though both versions break the fourth wall from time to time, it doesn't appear that the movie version talks in yellow as far as I can hear. Though, I already did that joke in the MCU ranking and copy-pasted pretty much all of this while adding Fox's specific details in. So this was by far my favorite entry. And despite massive changes, the effort to keep a lot of his most well-known elements the same, specifically in the first movie, despite drastically changing every other character, easily gets him this damn high on the ranking. And now, here we are, the moment you've been waiting for. The number one most well-adapted hero in the Fox X-Men shared cinematic universe. Who could it be? Will it be Cypher? Wolfsbane? Oh, come on, we all know who it is by this point. His name's been said like 30 times across this video, while remaining suspiciously absent. At number one, we have Professor X. Both versions grew up wealthy and learned of and mastered their mutant ability to read minds and project his own thoughts into the minds of others at a young age. Both versions had a future villain as a foster sibling. In the movies, this is Mystique, who he meets and has taken in, likely using his powers to get his parents to do so. In the comics, his mother married another man after his father's death, making Cain Marko his foster's brother, who later goes on to become the Juggernaut. And according to Deadpool 2, Juggernaut makes references implying that Xavier is his stepbrother as well, though we never see anything further of this connection or know how it could have played out. Another similarity, but also drastic difference in their childhoods, is that both versions had twins who were not a big part of his life. In the comics, though, it's much, much, much more complicated than this. That was Cassandra Nova, who died in the womb and was stillborn. And though a version of Cassandra Nova did appear in Deadpool 3, that was Disney, so it doesn't matter here. Within Fox, that twin, according to the commentary of X-Men 3, was the comatose man we see Xavier talking about earlier in the movie, that he later places his consciousness inside of, explaining the similar appearance when he shows up later again in Wolverine after inhabiting that body. Charles Xavier excels academically through life, both due to his immense intelligence as well as his powers, and develops a specific interest in genetics, evolution, and mutation. Both movie and comic versions later meet and develop feelings for Moira McTaggart, though with very different versions of her under very different circumstances. Both versions soon after begin working with the government, though in very different capacities. In the comics, he joined the military. In the movies, he was reached out to work alongside the CIA. He eventually meets a younger Magneto. The two have conflicting views of humans and mutants, with Xavier coming to believe that there is a possibility for peaceful coexistence, likely due to his increased empathy and understanding of humanity due to his being able to read minds. While Magneto's own experiences as a survivor of the Holocaust gives him a much more misanthropic view that those who are different will inevitably be oppressed and eliminated. Though the two have drastically different views on this issue, they agree and bond on many other things, becoming friends and allies for a time, teaming up to use their powers to fight against threats like Sebastian Shaw in the movies or Wolfgang von Strucker in the comics, both eventually going their separate ways. Both versions become inspired to put together a team of young mutants in the hope of protecting mutants from fearful or hateful humans, humans from dangerous mutants, and fostering peaceful relationships between both humans and mutants, eventually completely dedicating his life to that cause. The original version of the first class of X-Men debuted in the 60s in comics, though due to Marvel's sliding timeline, the date of the team forming is always moving forward. In the movies, they also had Xavier put together his first class of X-Men in that time period, though the roster was completely different besides both having Beast in them. In the movies, after forming the X-Men, Magneto inadvertently cripples Xavier. In the comics, Xavier was crippled before forming the X-Men by an advanced scout of an alien invasion known as Lucifer, with Lucifer escaping after Xavier foiled his plans, vowing to one day return. This, alongside many other threats Xavier learned of while traveling the world, was one of the inspirations to form a team to protect humanity and mutant alike. However, Magneto is shown to have crippled Xavier in the past of the Ultimate Comics universe, a separate Marvel universe modernized for the hip kids of the 2000s. In the movies, Xavier fell into a depression for a long time, forming a new version of the X-Men decades later, one much more akin to the first class seen in the comics, with both versions creating an institute for young mutants to learn to control their abilities safe from persecution as well as to train them to use those abilities to help the world. And using a device called Cerebro to find mutants, reaches out to young mutants like Jean Grey and Scott Summers, as well as much later, mutants like Aurora Monroe and Wolverine, all of whom he's left an incredible impact on the lives of, inspiring many of them with his ideals of peaceful existence between mutants and humans. His X-Men go on to safeguard mutants from threats by humanity, such as Bolivar Trask's Sentinel program, as well as fighting to protect humanity from threats like Magneto's Brotherhood, with Xavier and Magneto to continue to feel a level of respect and kinship for each other despite fighting on opposite sides, as well as protecting both human and mutant from powerful threats like Dark Phoenix, Apocalypse, or alien invaders. While most characters in this franchise don't dress anything like their comic counterpart, Charles Xavier in the comics does not usually wear a costume, instead usually dressing in well-tailored suits most of the time, reflecting whatever the style of the time is. Both versions are bald and ride in a wheelchair, with both the comic and movie versions being seen in advanced hovering versions at times. In the comics, he is bald naturally due to his powers. In the movies, in the revised timeline, he loses his hair after an encounter with Apocalypse, though we don't know the reason in the original timeline, probably just getting old. Both versions have also been cured of this paralysis for limited amounts of time, though always eventually returning to being unable to use his legs eventually. So, due to his dream of mutant/human coexistence and his desire to help protect the world being a focal point of both characters, his incredibly similar look and powers, his role in starting and leading the X-Men and founding a school for mutants, and his relationship to both his allies and his enemies, as well as many elements in his backstory that are both explicitly and coincidentally similar, Xavier easily wins as the most well-adapted hero within the Fox X-Men films. And I'm gonna guess a good number of you guessed that he would when you started this video. So there you go. Many of you said it would be impossible to do a best adapted heroes list, but you were dead wrong. It was only mostly impossible, as there were some valiant efforts to adapt some of these characters pretty close to the comic counterparts. Next up will be the villains, where things are not going to be as easy. That list is going to be a friggin' mess, so either look forward or cringe towards that coming. So, now that we've seen both the worst and best of the X-Men hero adaptations, here's the question for you. Were the characters closer to the comics the better characters in the franchise, or were the best characters ones who appeared on the worst adapted list? And going forwards, as many of these actors are grabbed up and tossed into the MCU with more comic-accurate costumes, like it sounds like they're planning to do at Disney, do you think they'll be more like the comics, or do you think it's just going to be low-effort nostalgia slops tossing random superficial elements of the 90s cartoon with these movies together and calling it a day? If you're still listening and you ain't hit that subscribe button yet, hit that crap, man! I always got more stuff like this coming. So hit that bell button too, or risk being the last kid on your block to see this new content. Anyways, off I go now to continue working towards my dream of peaceful coexistence between movies and comics, back to the danger room with you, until you hear my catchphrase calling you back into action of, "To me, my belligerent nerds." See ya!